The night before my dad died, he pulled me aside in the hospital room. The machines beeped around us like a broken clock. Dad was weak, struggling to breathe, but his eyes were sharp and focused on me. "Don't let your brother bully you anymore," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the oxygen machine. I thought he was delirious from the pain medication, because Dorian was his pride and joy. Dad always bragged about Dorian's law degree, his fancy apartment, his perfect life. But when Dad squeezed my hand harder than he had strength for, I realized he was completely serious. His grip was ice, but his words burned into my memory. "You'll know when it's time," he said, staring directly into my eyes. Those were the last words my father ever spoke to me. The next morning, the nurses found him peacefully gone. I sat there holding his cold hand, wondering what he meant. What time? Time for what? I had no idea that Dad had already set everything in motion. At the funeral, Dorian stood up front like it was his coronation ceremony. He wore his most expensive black suit and gave a speech about how he was Dad's legacy and the one who carried the family name forward. Everyone clapped and nodded, dabbing their eyes with tissues. I just sat in the back row, numb and invisible, like always, because I'd been the one holding Dad's hand when he took his last breath. I'd been the one visiting him every single day for 3 months while Dorian showed up twice. But none of that seemed to matter now. Afterward, as people gathered around Dorian to shake his hand and offer condolences, he didn't even look at me. The only acknowledgement I got was when he hissed in my ear while walking past, "Stay out of the way." His breath smelled like coffee and mint gum. That was the first time I felt like maybe Dad knew something I didn't. Maybe he saw through Dorian's perfect act. Maybe those final words weren't just the ramblings of a dying man. A week later, I was making coffee in Dad's house when Dorian stormed into the kitchen. The house still smelled like Dad's cologne and old books, making everything feel surreal. "You shouldn't be here," Dorian snapped, slamming the refrigerator door so hard the magnets fell off. His face was red with anger, veins visible on his forehead. I reminded him calmly that the house wasn't his property yet, that nothing had been settled legally. That's when he completely lost it. He shoved me against the counter, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to prove his point and make me stumble. The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the tile floor. "You're not family anymore," he said coldly, his voice like winter air. "Don't you ever forget that." Then he stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Dad might have felt sorry for you, but I don't. You were always the mistake he had to clean up." I stared at him in shock, realizing this is who my brother really was underneath his lawyer facade. Just before you continue to watch, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage and help us keep creating amazing content for you. All right, back to the story. 2 days later, the lawyer called my cell phone while I was at work. "There's a letter addressed specifically to you in the will packet," Mr. Henderson said, his voice professional but curious. My stomach dropped to the floor. Why would Dad single me out for a personal letter? I'd never been singled out for anything good in my entire life. Dorian, of course, immediately demanded to know what was in the letter when I mentioned the call to him. His eyes lit up with suspicion and anger. "What kind of letter?" he pressed, following me around Dad's house. "It's probably just sentimental garbage. Dad always babied you." But when Mr. Henderson refused to discuss the contents over the phone, requiring me to come in person, I saw something I'd never seen before. Dorian's perfect mask cracked just slightly. His jaw tightened and his hands clenched into fists. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but there was fear in his voice. Real fear. For the first time in our lives, I had something he wanted to know about, and he couldn't control the situation. The balance of power was shifting, and we both felt it. The family gathered in Mr. Henderson's office for the will reading. Dorian leaned back in his leather chair, smirking confidently and checking his expensive watch. He was waiting for his victory lap, probably already planning what to do with his inheritance. Aunt Marie, Uncle Paul, and a few cousins filled the remaining chairs, whispering among themselves about funeral arrangements and family memories. But when Mr. Henderson began reading aloud from Dad's will, Dorian's smirk slowly faded like ice melting in the sun. Dad's will mentioned me, by name, repeatedly. My full name, Elise Catherine Morrison. It mentioned the house, the bank accounts, the family business, all going to me. But Dorian's name? It wasn't there. Not once. Not anywhere in the entire document. The silence in that room was louder than any scream could have been. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. You could hear people breathing, hear chairs creaking as everyone shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Marie's mouth fell open. Uncle Paul cleared his throat nervously, and Dorian sat frozen, his face slowly draining of all color as the reality hit him. Dorian exploded. He slammed his fist on Mr. Henderson's polished desk so hard that pens jumped and scattered. "This is a mistake," he shouted, spittle flying from his mouth. "My father wouldn't do this to me. There has to be an error in the paperwork." Mr. Henderson calmly reached into his briefcase and slid over the signed and notarized documents. Dad's signature was clear and unmistakable, dated just 2 weeks before he died. Dorian's face turned red, veins popping in his neck like cords. He pointed his finger directly at me, his hand shaking with rage. "She manipulated him. She turned him against me when he was weak and dying." His voice cracked on the last words. Everyone in the room stared at me, waiting for my reaction. And I realized something incredible. For once in my entire life, I wasn't invisible. I was the center of attention, but not because I'd done something wrong. I was there because I mattered, because Dad had chosen me. The invisible daughter had become the only one who counted. After the explosive reading, Mr. Henderson handed me the sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I tore it open right there in front of everyone. Inside was a small brass key taped to a folded note. The paper felt expensive and thick between my fingers. Dad's message was short but mysterious. "Use it when you're ready. Trust your instincts." That was all it said. No explanation, no instructions, just those cryptic words that made my heart race. I ran my fingers over the key, wondering what lock it belonged to and what secrets it might unlock. The metal was warm from being in the envelope, and it had intricate designs carved into the handle. Dorian saw me slip it into my pocket, and his eyes went completely dark. "What is that?" he demanded, stepping toward me aggressively. "What did he give you?" But I didn't answer. For the first time in my entire life, I had something that was mine alone, something Dorian couldn't take or control. The power felt strange and terrifying and wonderful all at once. That night, I went back to Dad's study with the mysterious key. The room felt different without him there, empty and cold despite the familiar furniture and books. Behind Dad's favorite painting of a lighthouse, I found the old wall safe he thought nobody knew about. My hands shook as I tried the key, but it didn't fit the lock. I felt disappointed and confused. But when I touched the safe handle, the door creaked open on its own. It had already been unlocked. Inside, there was nothing but dust and shadows and the smell of old metal, empty, completely empty, except for one thing, a folded receipt tucked into the corner. The paper was crisp and white, dated exactly 1 week before Dad died. My heart started pounding as I unfolded it carefully. It was from First National Bank, and it mentioned a safety deposit box, box number 247. The receipt was signed in Dad's shaky handwriting, the signature getting weaker toward the end. Whatever Dad had hidden from Dorian, whatever secret he'd kept locked away, it wasn't in this safe. It was waiting for me somewhere else. The receipt felt like fire in my hands. It was for a safety deposit box at First National Bank, dated just 1 week before Dad passed away. My heart pounded louder. I swear the neighbors could hear it. Did Dad hide something important there? Something meant only for me? I was studying the bank's address when footsteps echoed in the hallway. Dorian suddenly appeared in the doorway, his face pale and covered in sweat like he had been running. His eyes immediately went to my hands. "Give me what's in your hand," he demanded, his voice low and threatening. I quickly slid the receipt up my sleeve, praying he hadn't seen what it was. "There's nothing," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. The safe was empty. His jaw clenched tight, and he stepped into the study, closing the distance between us. "You're lying," he said through gritted teeth. "You always were a terrible liar, Elise." He didn't believe me for a second. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the fear that I'd found something important. "Dad wouldn't leave you anything valuable. You're nobody. You've always been nobody." The next morning, I went to First National Bank alone, my hands sweating as I gripped the brass key. The bank felt huge and intimidating, with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, recognized Dad's key immediately. "Mr. Morrison was very specific about this box," she said softly, leading me to a private room. "He said it was for your eyes only." She used her key and mine together to open the safety deposit box. When the metal door swung open, I expected to find money or important documents. Instead, there was a thick, leather-bound journal that smelled like Dad's cologne and a USB drive in a clear plastic bag. The journal looked old and well-used, with Dad's initials embossed on the cover in gold letters. "Your father visited this box several times in his final weeks," the clerk whispered, glancing around nervously. "He seemed very concerned about something, very urgent. He made me promise twice that only you could access this." I stared at the contents, wondering what secrets Dad had hidden here. What had been so important that he'd kept it locked away from everyone, including Dorian? I took the journal home and locked myself in my bedroom to read it. The first pages were boring: business notes, farm expenses, grocery lists, random thoughts about the weather. Dad's handwriting was neat and careful in the early entries. But then, about halfway through, everything changed. The writing became messier, more urgent, like he was angry or scared while writing. He wrote about Dorian in detail: his gambling debts, his lies about law school grades, the times he'd stolen money from Dad's accounts. Page after page of discoveries that broke my heart. "Found another forged check today, $3,000 this time. How could I raise such a selfish son?" One entry made my blood run cold. "Dorian threatened me today. Said I should change my will or I might have an accident." He actually used those words. My own son threatened my life. The final page was dated just 3 days before Dad died. In shaky handwriting, it simply said, "Elise will know what to do. She's the only one I can trust now." My hands were trembling as I closed the journal. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop with shaking fingers. The screen filled with video files, all labeled with dates from the past 6 months. I clicked on the first one. Dad appeared on screen, sitting in his study, speaking directly to the camera. His voice was tired but determined. "If you're watching this, Elise, then I'm gone, and you found what I left for you." Video after video showed Dad documenting Dorian's behavior. In one, he detailed how Dorian had tried to force him to change the will by threatening to cut off all contact. In another, he showed bank statements proving Dorian had stolen over $20,000. But the worst video was the last one. Dad looked directly into the camera, his eyes filled with fear and sadness. "Dorian came here tonight screaming about money. He said if he didn't give me his inheritance early, he'd make sure I had an accident. He said it would be easy to make it look natural given my heart condition." My blood ran completely cold. Dad knew he was in danger. He knew his own son was a threat to his life. That night, I heard footsteps outside my apartment door. Heavy, slow footsteps that stopped right outside my unit. A shadow passed under the crack of light at the bottom of the door, blocking out the hallway lighting. My heart hammered in my chest as I held my breath, trying not to make any sound. Then I heard a whisper, cold and menacing. "Open up, Elise. I know you're in there." It was Dorian's voice, but different somehow. Darker, more dangerous than I had ever heard it before. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink. I just sat frozen on my couch, clutching Dad's journal to my chest like a shield. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the footsteps slowly faded away down the hall. I waited another 20 minutes before I finally got the courage to approach the door. When I opened it, carefully, there was a note taped to the outside. Written in Dorian's lawyer handwriting, it said, "You think you won, but you don't know what I know. This isn't over, little sister." The words made my skin crawl. What didn't I know? What else was Dorian hiding? Back in Dad's journal, I noticed something I'd missed before. Random numbers scribbled in the margins of several pages. At first, I thought they were just doodles or phone numbers. But looking closer, I realized they followed the pattern of bank account numbers. Long strings of digits with routing numbers underneath. My heart started racing. As I gathered all the numbers and took them to Mr. Henderson the next morning, These appeared to be account numbers, he said, adjusting his glasses. Let me make some calls. An hour later, he called me back with shocking news. Dad had moved a large portion of his assets, over $800,000, into a special account under my name only, an account that had been set up months ago, long before he got sick. Your father was very thorough, Mr. Henderson explained. This account requires only your signature to access. No one else even knows it exists. Dorian didn't know about the money. He thought the house and business were all there was. But Dad had been planning this for a long time. The invisible daughter wasn't so invisible after all. Dad was protecting me and punishing Dorian. Word about the inheritance spread through our small town like wildfire. Suddenly, relatives who had ignored me for years wanted to have coffee and catch up. Aunt Marie, who hadn't spoken to me since I was 12, called crying. I always believed in you, sweetie. I always knew you were special. I wanted to laugh in her face. These same people had watched Dorian treat me like garbage for decades without saying a word. Meanwhile, Dorian was completely unraveling. He started showing up drunk at family dinners, screaming at anyone who would listen about how I manipulated Dad. At Cousin Jenny's birthday party, he threw a plate of food against the wall and called me a conniving little witch. Uncle Paul had to physically escort him outside. Every time Dorian cracked and showed his true colors, more people started looking at me with respect instead of pity. They were finally seeing what Dad had seen, that the golden child was actually made of fool's gold, while the invisible daughter had been the real treasure. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I could trust my cousin Mira, who had always been kind to me. She was the only family member who seemed genuinely happy about my inheritance. Over coffee, I showed her a few pages from Dad's journal, hoping she'd back me up about Dorian's true nature. I can't believe he stole from Uncle Robert, she gasped, reading about the forged checks. This is awful, but you should document everything in case Dorian tries to challenge the will. She seemed so supportive, so understanding. But the very next day, Dorian somehow had screenshots of the journal pages I had shown her. Mira had photographed them and sent them to him behind my back. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from Dorian. You should have kept your mouth shut, little sister. Now I know exactly what you have on me. And I know how to fix it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I read the message over and over. I'd been so desperate for an ally that I'd trusted the wrong person. Now Dorian knew I had evidence of his crimes, and he was planning something. I was completely alone. Dorian showed up at my work the next day, cornering me in the employee parking lot as I was leaving. He was holding a manila envelope and wearing a sick smile. We need to talk, he said, blocking my path to my car. I have something you might find interesting. He opened the envelope and pulled out photographs, personal ones from my college years that I thought no one had. Pictures from a party where I'd made some bad decisions, photos that would be embarrassing if they got out. Give me access to Dad's secret bank account, he said calmly, or I'll make sure everyone sees these. Your boss, your neighbors, everyone at church. I'll destroy your reputation like you're trying to destroy mine. My stomach dropped to my feet. But then I remembered something from Dad's videos, when he'd talked about standing up to bullies. Dorian only wins if you stay afraid, Dad had said. The truth is always stronger than threats. I looked my brother in the eye and said the word he'd never expected to hear from me. No. His face went white with shock. Nobody had ever said no to Dorian before. 2 nights later, Dorian's car was found wrapped around an oak tree on Highway 92. The front end was completely crushed and broken glass covered the asphalt for 50 feet. He wasn't killed, but he broke his left leg, his right wrist, and had a concussion that kept him in the hospital for a week. Everyone in town whispered about drunk driving, though the police didn't press any charges. They said there was no evidence of alcohol in his system, just that he'd lost control on a curve. When I visited him in the hospital, he was lying in bed with his leg elevated, looking pale and weak. But when he saw me, his eyes filled with pure hatred. He cursed through gritted teeth, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they had removed that morning. "This isn't over," he said. "You think you're so smart, but I know what you did. I know you caused this somehow." His paranoia was showing. He actually believed I had somehow made him crash his car.
The golden child was cracking up, and everyone could see it. I just looked at him calmly and said, "Get well soon, Dorian." A week later, Mr. Henderson called with news that made my chest tighten with anxiety. "There's an addendum to your father's will that just surfaced," he said, his voice careful and professional. "We need to meet as soon as possible." I rushed to his office, my mind racing with possibilities. What if Dad had changed his mind? What if there was some clause that gave everything back to Dorian? He slid a new document across his desk, and I saw that it was in Dad's handwriting again, but shakier than before. The addendum was dated just 5 days before he died. If Dorian threatens Elise in any way, shape, or form, his remaining share of the estate, whatever amount that may be, reverts fully to her. My hands
trembled as I read it twice to make sure I understood. "Your father left Dorian a small savings account," Mr. Henderson explained. "About $15,000. But according to this addendum and the evidence you've provided of threats and harassment, even that money now belongs to you." Dad had predicted everything. He'd known Dorian would try to intimidate me, and he'd planned for it. The invisible daughter now owned everything. I remembered there was one last video file on Dad's USB drive that I hadn't watched yet. That night, I opened it with shaking hands. Dad appeared on screen looking older and more tired than in the other videos. His voice was weaker, but his eyes were still sharp and focused. "If you're watching this, Elise, then Dorian has already tried to destroy you. Don't let him succeed. You're stronger than you know, and the truth is enough to protect you." He leaned closer to the camera, his face filling the screen. "I should have stopped him years ago. I should have protected you better, but I was a coward who didn't want to admit what my son had become." Then his expression changed, becoming even more serious. "And Elise, there's something you still don't know about our family. Something I should have told you long ago, but I was afraid it would hurt you even more." The video suddenly cut off, leaving me staring at a black screen. What didn't I know? What family secret had Dad taken to his grave? I checked the file, but that was all there was. The most important revelation had been left unfinished. I found the next clue buried in the margins of Dad's journal. An address scribbled in pencil between 2 entries about Dorian's debts. The address led me to a storage unit facility on the edge of town, the kind of place people keep old furniture and Christmas decorations. Unit 47 was small and dusty, filled with boxes labeled in Dad's handwriting. Tax records, 1985 to 1990, insurance papers, old photos. At the bottom of a box marked Family Documents, I found a sealed manila envelope with my name written across it in black ink. My heart pounded as I tore it open, wondering what final secret Dad had hidden here. Inside were papers that looked official and important, documents with raised seals and formal letterheads. As I unfolded the first page, my world tilted sideways. It was a birth certificate, but not the one I'd always known about. This one had different information, different names, different dates. The father listed wasn't Robert Morrison, it was someone named David Chen, a name I'd never heard before. My mind reeled as the implications hit me. If this was real, if this was my actual birth certificate, then Dad wasn't my biological father, and Dorian wasn't my full brother. The birth certificate felt like it was burning my fingers. According to this document, my real father was David Chen, and my mother had been married to him before she married Dad. I wasn't a Morrison by blood, I was a Chen. The invisible daughter had been invisible for a completely different reason. I wasn't really part of the family I'd grown up in. But there was more in the envelope, a letter from my mother, dated 28 years ago, explaining everything. She'd been pregnant with me when David died in a car accident. Robert Morrison had married her and adopted me, giving me his name and promising to love me as his own child. "He has been a better father to you than your biological father ever could have been," Mom had written. "But I wanted you to know the truth someday."
Dad had kept this secret for my entire life. He'd raised me, loved me, protected me, even though I wasn't his biological daughter. And now I understood why he left everything to me instead of Dorian. Blood didn't make family. Love did. And Dad had loved me more than his own biological son, who had turned into a monster. I confronted Dorian with the truth at his apartment, still using crutches from his car accident. When I showed him the birth certificate, he laughed, actually laughed out loud. Finally figured it out, he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Dad never told you because he pitied you. He was your charity case, his good deed, the poor little orphan he rescued. I felt rage building in my chest like fire. I spat back at him. You loved me more than you, and you know it. That's why you've hated me your whole life. His face twisted into something ugly and feral. He swung his crutch at me, missing by inches. In my anger, I threw the envelope at him, and he batted it away so hard that it hit a picture frame on the wall. Glass shattered everywhere, covering the floor like diamonds. You think you're so special? You think winning Dad's money makes you family? You'll never be a real Morrison. You're nothing but a fake, a fraud, a charity case that Dad felt sorry for. But his words didn't hurt anymore. I knew the truth. Dad had chosen me over his own blood. That made me more of a Morrison than Dorian would ever be. The next morning, Dorian was gone. His apartment was completely empty, cleaned out overnight like he'd never lived there at all. No forwarding address, no phone calls, no texts. He'd just vanished into thin air, leaving only dust outlines where his furniture had been. The landlord said he'd paid the lease through the end of the month and left the keys on the counter. It's like he'd been erased from existence. The only trace he left behind was a voicemail on my phone, his voice low and ragged and almost unrecognizable. You win, Elise. You got everything you wanted. But mark my words, you'll regret this. Someday, when you're all alone with your blood money, you'll remember that I was the only real family you had left. The message sent chills down my spine, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel fear when I thought about my brother. I felt something I'd never experienced before. Freedom. Complete and total freedom from his bullying, his threats, his toxic presence. The golden child had finally tarnished completely, and now he was gone forever. I sat at Dad's old desk in the study, his journal open in front of me to the very last page. In shaky handwriting that got weaker toward the end, he'd written 5 final words. Now you know the truth. My chest tightened, and tears streamed down my face as I understood everything. The truth wasn't just about Dorian's crimes or the money or even my real parentage. The truth was that Dad had seen me, really seen me, when no one else had. He'd recognized my worth when everyone else, including me, thought I was invisible. Robert Morrison might not have been my biological father, but he was my real dad in every way that mattered. He protected me, planned for me, and loved me enough to make the hardest decision of his life. As I closed the journal for the final time, I realized this story wasn't about revenge or money or even family secrets. It was about stepping out of the shadows and into the light, about discovering that being invisible had actually made me powerful. The quiet daughter had inherited everything because she was the only one worth inheriting. Now I understood what Dad meant when he said, "You'll know when it's time." The time was now. Time to stop being invisible and start being everything he'd always known I could be.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also, check out other videos on the channel. We've got more interesting stories for you.